Arizona Territory, 1872. The sun was already high when they dragged Willa Prescott to the church steps in the center of Dry River. She stumbled as they shoved her forward, dusty boots scraping the wooden platform. Her wrists were bound, her lips split, and her heart hammering against her ribs. Townsfolk gathered not out of kindness but to watch, to bid, to buy. The sheriff stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes cold. "She's no better than her husband," someone muttered. "She'll work off his debt or starve," another said. Willa's husband had died 3 nights ago, drunk and broke, leaving behind nothing but gambling debts and 2 hungry children, both not hers by blood but by heart. Sybil was 7 and Seth just 5. Their mother had died a year back, and Willa had been the only one willing to raise them when no one else would. Now they were alone, watching from behind the livery with wide, terrified eyes. "Startin' at $50, barked a man in a vest too fine for this town. "For one able-bodied woman. She cooks, cleans, and does not talk back." Willa didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the horizon, praying for something to cut through the heat and dust. Then came the sound of hooves. A rider came in from the west, coat flapping behind him, dust cloud rising in his wake. He slid from the saddle without a word, boots heavy as he stepped through the murmuring crowd. His hat shadowed most of his face, but his jaw was hard, and his eyes, when they found Willa, burned hot with something like fury. "Who are you?" the auctioneer asked. The man didn't answer. He turned to the crowd. "You trying to sell a woman like cattle?" His voice was sharp, rough like gravel, but steady. "She owes the town," the sheriff said. "Debts need paying." The man reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. "How much?" "200, the sheriff said. Without blinking, the man tossed the pouch down. "Paid." The crowd shifted. Murmurs turned to stunned silence. He stepped to Willa, undid the ropes around her wrists, and when she faltered, he caught her by the elbow, gentle, steady. "You are not property," he said low, just to her. She looked up at him, confused. "Why would you?" He guided her down the steps. "Name's Zane Ellery." "I didn't ask for saving," she said, though her voice trembled. "Wasn't about saving," he answered. "It was about stopping something wrong." Behind them, the auctioneer sputtered. The sheriff cursed, but Zane didn't look back. He led her through the crowd like she mattered, like she was not broken or ruined or shamed. At the edge of town, the 2 children came running. "Willa!" Sybil cried, throwing her arms around her waist. Seth clung to her skirt, face buried. Zane looked from the children to Willa. "Yours? They are now," she said, her chin lifting. "I promised their mother I'd keep them." Zane nodded once, like he understood something deeper than the words. "You got anywhere safe?" "No," she said. "Not anymore." He glanced toward his horse. "Then you are coming with me. I don't even know you. You think I'd pay $200 just to leave you standing here?" His tone was flat. "I got a place 2 days west, quiet, there's room." Willa hesitated, eyes flicking to the children. They were watching her, waiting. She looked back at Zane. "Why are you doing this?" He shrugged. "Maybe I owe the world something too." They rode out before sundown. The trail was rough. Willa rode with Sybil in front of her, Seth pressed against Zane's back as he led the way. They camped beneath the stars that night, the fire crackling low. Willa sat across from Zane, her arms wrapped around Sybil, while Seth lay snoring on a pile of blankets. She studied the man who had changed her life in one moment. He sat sharpening a knife, eyes fixed on the blade, but not really seeing it. "I do not understand you," she said. "You do not have to," he said without looking up, "but I want to." Zane finally met her eyes. "I know what it is to lose everything." Willa's throat tightened. And I do not like watching someone else go through it." She said nothing. But her hand, resting on Sybil's shoulder, shifted slightly toward the firelight. He noticed everything, it seemed, and tossed a blanket her way. The next day they rode through canyons and dry riverbeds. Zane kept to himself mostly, but when Seth got tired, he lifted the boy up into his arms without complaint. When Sybil asked questions, he answered in simple words, never once brushing her off. Willa watched him, careful. By the second night, she was not afraid anymore. By the third, She was wondering what kind of man would spend $200 to save a stranger and then ask for nothing. At dusk on the fourth day, they reached Zane's land, an old ranch tucked between sun-bleached hills, and a cottonwood-lined creek. The house was plain but sturdy, a barn off to one side, chicken coops behind. He helped Willa down from her horse. "You and the children take the house, I will stay in the barn." "You do not have to," she said quietly. "I know, still." "You do not have to." Zane looked at her then, really looked. "You are safe here. That is what matters." Willa looked at the porch, the shutters, the little wooden swing. She looked at the man who had not once asked her what she could do for him. She looked back at her children, who were already chasing each other under the cottonwoods. Then she turned back to Zane and nodded. "Thank you." He just tipped his hat and walked toward the barn. But that night, Willa stood by the window and watched him build a fire in the dark. She saw the way he sat alone, quiet, his shoulders tense like he was used to silence. She thought of the way he had looked at her, not with pity but with something else. Something careful, something honest, and for the first time in weeks her heart did not feel so heavy, not broken. Just beginning again. The days began early on Zane's land. By first light, he was already out in the corral, rubbing down the bay mare and checking the fence line. Willa stood on the porch with a tin mug of coffee cupped in both hands, watching the way he moved, unhurried, but never idle. Inside, Sybil was folding the last of the bedding while Seth tried to tie his shoes. Willa crouched beside him, guiding his fingers through the knot. "You'll get it this time," she said. "Will he stay out there all day?" Sybil asked from the doorway. Willa glanced back toward the barn. "Looks like it. He don't talk much." "No," Willa said, brushing a strand of hair behind Sybil's ear. "But not all quiet means trouble. They spent the morning cleaning out the kitchen. The cabinets were bare save for some flour and dried beans." Willa found a root cellar dug deep behind the house, with shelves lined in preserves, smoked venison, and sacks of cornmeal. By noon, bread was rising on the stove, and the air smelled faintly of molasses. That afternoon, Zane returned from the west edge of the property carrying 3 rabbits, their ears limp, their bodies swinging from a loop of twine. He laid them on the chopping block without a word. "You trap those?" Willa asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Set snares last night." She stepped closer. "I can skin them. You look like you've been doing enough already." He handed her his knife, the handle worn smooth. "You know how my father was a trapper," she said. "I learned before I could read." Zane leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. "That's so. I used to hate the smell," she said, slicing along the belly of the first rabbit. "But he always said nothing should go to waste." Zane nodded once. He was right. Beside the barn, Seth chased a chicken in crooked circles while Sybil sat beneath the cottonwood with a stick and a string, pretending to fish the dry earth. Willa watched them through the dust rising in the wind. "They look steadier," Zane said. "They are. Children know when the ground's solid under them. You gave them that." His gaze lingered on the children a moment longer, then drifted back to Willa. "How long were you in Dry River?" "Too long." "Why'd you stay?" She didn't answer right away. She wiped her blade, eyes on the blood-soaked cloth. "I kept waiting for things to get better." "They didn't." "No." Zane's jaw shifted slightly, but he said nothing. That evening, after the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the fields, Willa lit the oil lamp in the kitchen and stood at the window. Zane was out near the barn again, stacking firewood. His shirt clung to his back, his hat pulled low. He moved with the same quiet rhythm he always did, like the land had taught him patience. "You're watching him again," Sybil said from behind her, arms crossed. Willa smiled faintly. "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything, just saying." "Well, don't say." Sybil looked up at her, serious now. "Is he gonna stay?" Willa turned from the window, crouched down to meet her eyes. "This is his home." Sybil blinked. "Then are we gonna stay?" Willa hesitated. "I don't know." Sybil looked down. "I think he likes you." "Sybil, I think you like him too." Willa rested her hand on the girl's cheek. "Go check on your brother." When the children were asleep, Willa stepped out into the cool night air. The stars were sharp above, scattered across the sky like shattered bone. She walked toward the barn, her feet crunching softly on the gravel path. Zane was sitting on an overturned bucket, sharpening a hatchet. "You never stop," she said. He looked up. "Idle hands make for loud thoughts." "Is that what you're running from?" He gave a small shrug. "Some things are better left quiet." She leaned against the doorframe. "I used to believe that too. But quiet turns into silence, and silence turns into forgetting. You don't seem like someone who forgets easy." "I don't," she said. "That's the trouble." Zane set the hatchet down. "What is it you're holding on to?" She looked out into the dark. "A promise, a lot of hurt. And the fear that I'll never feel like I belong anywhere again." He stood slowly. "You belong here." She met his eyes, her voice low. "You barely know me." "I know enough." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of juniper and smoke between them. Willa stepped closer, her hands folded in front of her. "You're not like other men," she said. "Most men don't want to be alone. I've just gotten used to it." "What if you didn't have to be?" Zane said nothing, but his eyes softened just enough to matter. Willa reached up, touched his shirt front, fingers brushing a patch stitched at the shoulder. "You mend your own clothes." "Not very well. I could do better." He let out a breath, not quite a laugh, but close. "I'd let you." She stepped back just enough and smiled. "Good night, Zane." He watched her go, the swing of her skirt catching in the lantern light, and for the first time in years, he wondered what it might feel like to let someone stay. The wind had shifted by morning, coming down from the north with a bite that hinted at early frost. Willa wrapped a shawl around her shoulders before stepping outside, her breath showing in the pale dawn light. The cottonwoods along the creek had begun to yellow at the edges, and the chickens kept close to the coop, feathers puffed against the chill. Zane was already up the slope, digging a trench beyond the barn. At first she thought it might be for drainage, but as she walked closer she saw the posts lying nearby, stacked pine, stripped clean. "You building fence?" she asked, keeping her voice low so as not to startle him. He didn't stop digging. "Pen for goats. There's a man over near Fortuna who's got a pair near ready to birth. Figured they'd be worth the trade." She stepped around the trench, hands folded in front of her. "You planning for spring already?" "Can't wait for the ground to thaw before preparing." "Too late by then." Willa watched him a moment. "You always plan that far ahead, only since I had someone to plan for." The words hung there, simple but sure. He didn't look up when he said them, just kept driving the blade into the earth, steady as ever. Willa crouched beside him, picked up a post and ran her fingers along the grain. "I could help set these, if you show me how." Zane paused, leaned on the shovel. "You ever dig post holes before?" "No, but I've done harder things." He nodded once and handed her the next shovel. "You want the corner marked there. Dig deep, straight down. If it leans, the whole row will." They worked in rhythm, he digging, she following, setting the posts, packing them firm. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was work silence, the kind that settled in when two people knew what needed doing. By noon, her palms were blistering. She didn't complain. Instead, she dipped water from the barrel and handed the tin cup to Zane. He drank, then passed it back. "You always keep this kind of pace?" she asked. "If I stop, I might not start again." She leaned against the fence, catching her breath. "You ever had anyone help you before?" "No." "Then how'd you build all this?" "Took time," she nodded. "That I understand." Later, while she peeled apples in the kitchen, Sybil came in holding a strand of twine. "I made a bridle," she said proudly, "for Seth's stick horse." Willa smiled, setting the knife aside. "Let me see." The twine had been knotted carefully with little loops at the ends. "He used to cry when his real pa rode off," Sybil said quietly. "Now he says he wants to ride like Zane." Willa's hands fell still. "He said that," Sybil nodded. "Zane doesn't talk much, but he listens. Seth likes that." Willa brushed flour from her apron. "So do I." That evening, Zane brought in a bundle of sage he'd cut near the ridge. He handed it to Willa without a word. She took it, held it to her chest. "I used to hang this by the windows," she said. "Keeps the flies out, smells like home." He stepped back, watching her tie it above the stove. "You lost your folks young?" he asked. She nodded. My mother died birthing my sister. My father froze in a storm 2 winters later. He didn't offer sympathy, just waited. I was taken in by a woman who ran a boarding house in Prescott. She didn't want daughters, only hands. I scrubbed floors and served meals until I was 17. Then I left. Zane leaned against the doorframe. You marry for love? No, she said. But I don't carry bitterness. He gave me Sybil and Seth in a way. Zane looked at the fire. You could have turned hard. I did, she said. Then I didn't want to be that way anymore. They stood there a long time, the only sound the crackle of kindling and the low murmur of chickens settling down outside. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. Used to, he said. Not anymore. Later that night, Willa checked the door latch, then moved to the children's room. Seth had rolled onto his side, clutching his stick horse. Sybil slept with one hand tucked under her cheek, steady and peaceful. Willa watched them a long moment, then stepped out onto the porch where Zane was sitting with his boots propped on the railing, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. She sat beside him. The air was sharp now, the stars clear and close. Do you ever miss what came before? She asked. He didn't answer right away. I miss the idea of it, not the truth, she nodded. I know that too well. He looked over at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. You deserve something steady now. Not just safe, something that holds. I'm not sure I'd know how to let it in. Zane set his cup down. You don't have to, just don't push it away. Willa looked at him, really looked at the lines around his eyes, the quiet weight he carried, the steadiness he never once used to control or command. She reached out slowly and laid her hand over his. He didn't move. Neither of them spoke again that night, but the silence between them had changed shape. It wasn't the kind that divided. It was the kind that held something patient and unfinished, something waiting to be chosen. The next morning, Willa woke before sunrise, the room still gray with sleep. She dressed quietly, pulled the shawl from the peg and stepped out onto the porch. The ground held a brittle layer of frost that shimmered along the fence posts and roof shingles, catching the first hints of light. Zane was in the north field carrying feed to the horses. She watched him cross the pasture, the cold catching in his breath as he moved. He hadn't seen her yet. She stood there a while, arms wrapped around herself, until the door creaked behind her. Sybil rubbed her eyes and leaned against the post. Can I help him today? Willa looked down. You'd have to ask. The girl nodded and wandered barefoot across the porch, hair tangled from sleep. Willa followed her with her eyes, then turned back toward the hills. By the time the sun broke over the ridge, the frost had melted to dew. Willa brought out a tin basin and set it on the barrel, then knelt to wash the laundry. Her knuckles stung in the cold water, but she kept scrubbing. There was something steadying in the rhythm. Behind her, the barn door creaked open. Zane stepped out, his coat dusted with sawdust, sleeves pushed to his elbows. You always this early with chores? He asked. Only when I've got something on my mind. He leaned against the rail. Want to say what it is? I've been thinking about the winter, she said, wringing out a shirt. The children'll need boots. Seth's grown out of his and Sybil's toes are near through the front. I'll take the wagon to Fortuna. There's a trading post there carries leather goods. She glanced up. You don't have to do that. I know. She stood, water dripping from her hands. I could sew liners if you bring back scraps. I used to patch boots for the men who boarded with us. Zane nodded. Leave a list. I'll go in 2 days. She hesitated, then added, I'd feel steadier if someone stayed here with the children. I'll ask Enoch to ride out, he said. He's old, but he's solid. He'll keep watch. Willa blinked. You trust him? Saved my life once. That's enough. She turned to hang the shirt on the line. You ever think about what comes after all this? What do you mean? The fence, the animals, the bread rising in the oven. You ever think about what it's all leading toward? Zane stepped off the porch, hands in his coat pockets. Sometimes I think the doing of it is the point. She watched him go, the back of his coat moving against the wind. That night, Willa lit a single candle in the kitchen and sat to mend a hem that had come loose on Sybil's dress. The children were asleep, and the house had gone quiet but for the rustle of thread and the soft groan of the wind outside. Zane entered without knocking, the door dragging slightly behind him. He carried a wrapped bundle in his hands. "Found this in the loft," he said, placing it on the table. Willa unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a wooden comb, smooth and dark with age. "Belonged to my mother," he said. "She carved it herself from mesquite." Willa ran her thumb along the teeth. "It's beautiful. She had thick hair like yours. Used to braid it down her back." Willa looked up. "What happened to her?" Zane sat across from her. "She died when I was 16. Fever swept through the valley, took her and 3 others. I'm sorry," he shrugged. "Taught me to cook before she passed. Said if a man couldn't feed himself, he'd starve waiting on someone who could." Willa smiled faintly. "She sounds like someone I'd have liked." Zane leaned forward. "She would have liked you." The candle flickered between them, casting long shadows against the wall. Willa picked up the comb again, then set it gently beside the mended dress. "I don't know what to do with kindness when it keeps coming," she said. "You don't have to do anything with it," Zane said. "You just let it be there." She stood slowly, the chair legs scraping the floor. "I should check the stove." He rose too. "Willa." She turned, fingers wrapped around the edge of her apron. "I'm not rushing anything," he said, "but I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him a long moment. "That's what I'm afraid of, not that you'll leave." "That you won't." Zane didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The next day he rode out before dawn, taking the wagon east toward Fortuna. Willa watched him go from the porch, her arms crossed tight over her chest. The road swallowed him fast, the dust rising behind the wheels until even the tracks disappeared. By midday, Enoch arrived. He was lean and weathered, with a limp in his left leg and a rifle slung casually over his shoulder. He tipped his hat to Willa and settled himself on the porch without ceremony. "You Zane's kin?" she asked. "Used to ride with his brother, long time ago." He never mentioned a brother. Enoch didn't answer right away. Wouldn't expect him to. Willa didn't press. She brought him coffee and let him be. That night she sat up late, listening to the wind scratch against the windows. The children slept soundly, but she couldn't settle. The house felt different with Zane gone, emptier, quieter in a way that didn't comfort. She reached for the comb on the shelf, ran it slowly through her hair, and thought of his mother braiding thick strands by firelight. And when she finally lay down, she left the candle burning just a little longer. Out beyond the cottonwoods, the wind carried the scent of dry earth and horses, and the stars blinked steady overhead. Zane returned 3 days later, just past dusk, the wagon wheels creaking low against the frost-hardened ground. Willa heard it before she saw its steady hoofbeats, the soft jangle of harness, then stepped out onto the porch, lantern in hand. He climbed down without a word, his face drawn from travel, dust streaking the folds of his coat. A canvas bundle lay in the wagon bed, tied with leather cord. He lifted it carefully and offered it to her. "For the children," he said, "and what you asked for." She took it in both arms. "You found everything?" "Most of what was on your list. The rest'll come from the tanner next month." Willa opened the bundle on the kitchen table. 2 pairs of boots smaller than she'd hoped and scraps of thick wool, dyed soft gray and ochre. There was a bolt of muslin, too, and a spool of strong thread. "You thought of more than I did," she said. "I figured you'd make good use." Seth tugged at Zane's coat before he could turn away. "Did you bring nails? Ma said we're fixing the coupe." Zane nodded. "In the saddlebag, you'll help." The boy grinned and darted out the door. Zane set the saddlebag down by the wall. Enoch say anything worth hearing. He mostly played checkers with Sybil and napped in the rocker. "Said you don't pay him enough to fuss." "I don't pay him at all." "Then he's cheaper than I thought." Zane sat across from her, elbows resting on the table. "Did you sleep?" "Not much, me neither." The fire snapped softly. She reached for the kettle and poured water into 2 cups, then sat again. "What was it like going back to town?" "Too loud. Too many faces I didn't know anymore." "Did anyone ask about me?" He shook his head. "Dry River's got short memory when it wants to." She traced a finger along the rim of her cup. "I've been thinking." "About leaving?" "No, about staying." Zane didn't move. "You sure?" I've spent most of my life in places I was meant to pass through. This feels different, he leaned forward slightly. I had a cabin once back in the mountains east of here, one-room, stone hearth roof that leaked every spring. I built it thinking I'd die there. What changed, I walked out one day, didn't go back. Willa met his eyes. You still think about it, sometimes, but not like I used to. She reached across the table, laid her hand over his. Neither do I. They sat like that a long while, the air between them still but not empty. From the back room came the soft sound of Sybil turning over in her sleep. Outside, wind moved through dry grass, steady and low. Winter came in slow. The mornings grew sharper, and Willa lined the children's boots with stitched wool. Zane reinforced the back wall of the barn with salvaged planks, and when the first snow dusted the ground, they brought the goats into the lean-to he'd built weeks earlier. The rhythm of life settled into something known. After supper, Zane would read aloud from the tattered primer that had come with the house. Sybil sat cross-legged on the floor, Seth curled against Willa's side, his thumb tucked into his fist. Sometimes they all fell asleep there by the fire, and no one bothered to move. One evening, Willa stood brushing out her hair by the window when Zane entered with a wooden box in his hands. He set it down gently on the table. I made something. She turned. What is it? He opened the lid. Inside lay a comb, carved from dark wood, the grain smooth beneath his thumb. The edges were rounded, simple but careful. I thought yours might wear down. She stepped closer, touched the teeth. You made this. Took my time. She lifted the comb, ran it through the ends of her hair. It's better than the last. I was hoping it would be. She looked at him then, really looked, the steadiness behind his quiet, the way he always moved just enough closer without ever pushing. I'd like to stay, Zane. He stepped forward, only a breath between them now. Then stay. I mean for good. I know what you mean. I care for you. He reached up, brushed her hair behind her ear. I've been waiting to hear you say that. She leaned into his chest, let his arms circle around her. You kept showing me. I just had to believe it. He held her there in the quiet, the firelight throwing soft shadows across the floor. Outside, the snow began again, slow and silent. They married in early spring. Enoch came down from the hills to stand witness, and Sybil insisted on placing wildflowers along the fence rail. Willa wore a dress she'd sewn from the muslin Zane brought back from Fortuna. She didn't wear a veil. There was nothing left to hide. After the vows, Zane lifted her hand to his lips and kissed the scar that ran along her knuckle, a mark she'd gotten years ago from a broken wash basin. That one healed, he said. They all did, she whispered. They built a life from there. Seth grew strong, learning to ride bareback by the time he was 10. Sybil read every book Zane could find, and later taught the neighbor children from the front room. Willa planted a garden behind the house and filled the shelves with preserves by fall. She kept the comb Zane carved in a cotton pouch under her pillow. Most nights, after the chores were done and the children asleep, Willa and Zane sat on the porch beneath the stars. Sometimes they spoke of the past, but mostly they spoke of what still lay ahead, planting rows, adding a second room, teaching Seth to use a plow. And always they sat close enough to touch, the quiet between them warm and full. They never left the land. They grew old there together, the house weathering wind and storm but standing fast. And in every season, in every silence, in every hand held and hardship met, they chose each other again. Every day without question.